When the lights go down in the city and the sun shines on the bay, oh, I want to be there in my city. Oh, oh, oh.
I was just kidding about that.
She can hear cars.
Is that through the boom or through the lab?
It's hard to tell. I just can hear them so well. You guys want to hear?
I could put it. I could put it right
You're
here.
gonna hear a little bit of street noise through the.
You want me to put the lab
and
right
the thing
here?
is, you're gonna hear street noises through this one. You know, you're hearing one through one ear and one
Do
through
you
the
want
other.
to put the lab up here?
It's possible. Yeah, maybe so. Right, you're gonna hear street noise through this microphone, and a little through.
Okay. Well, if you want to understand the connection between the Central Intelligence Agency and drug dealing, the simplest way is to go back about 300-400 years to the British East India Company and what it did in China when it was colonizing China. It grew the opium poppy in East India and smuggled the opium poppy into China to addict significant portions of the population to generate cash. They used that cash to buy the Chinese real estate and to destabilize the coastal regions around the port cities that they wanted. And after they had done that, they established a cash flow which essentially was the funding for their colonization of parts of China, including Hong Kong. That model really stayed the same. The CIA's role, even back before it was the CIA, going back to when it was the Office of Strategic Services in the Second World War, among other things, was to protect narcotics cash flows. It did it in the Second World War through Madame Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang armies, which continued up through Vietnam. Those relations with civil air transport and other CIA or OSS funded airlines became the foundation of things like Air America and many southern air transport that we saw during Iran-Contra. The cash flows generated by the drug trade are enormously powerful. It's not just a dollar of cash. These dollars are cheap capital. You don't have to pay interest on them. When you launder drug dollars through stocks, for example, if a stock has a price to earnings ratio of 60 to 1, $1 of drug money on the bottom line produces $60 in stock value. And that's exactly what we saw in Enron. In the case of Enron, closely tied with the CIA, which actually had CIA people, they had 700 subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands. Well, there's no oil and gas in the Cayman Islands. Enron Online was nothing but a huge international money laundering operation. And so this is something that has become a necessary part of the American and even the global economy with $600 billion a year. One of the CIA's biggest jobs is to make sure that U.S. financial markets, Wall Street, controls most of that money. Well, it's not a matter of allowing as if somebody went to all 10,000 FBI agents, you know, and all 8,000 DEA agents, or however many there are, and said, can we have your permission to deal drugs? It doesn't work that way. What happens is that, and it almost happened with me in the Los Angeles Police Department, is that the CIA, since its inception and even before, routinely placed personnel in all of these agencies in key positions, so that the issue became how you kept law enforcement operations away from your protected shipments. One of the best quotes I've ever heard in my whole life was from Chief Joseph McNamara of the San Jose Police Department in 1999. He was retired. He was at a drug conference at USC. And he pointed out that in 1972, when Richard Nixon started the war on drugs, the federal budget allocation was $101 million. Going into fiscal year 2000, the federal budget allocation was $20 billion. Yet there were more drugs in the country in 2000. They were of better quality and they were less expensive than they were in 1972. What's wrong with that picture? So the way it's done, which I saw firsthand at LAPD, was that there are networks called the Narcotics Intelligence Network, or now it's called Clearinghouse, where agencies who are doing a drug case don't step on each other's toes. If one guy is DEA, he's got an informant, LAPD makes an arrest, they want to go in and serve a search warrant, they might be taking out the DEA's guy, the FBI has somebody else inside. You have to clear that and whoever has access to that can pull the plug on any narcotics investigation. We actually saw that here in 1986 with major task force investigations of Freeway Ricky Ross. They had search warrants for 19 locations that were prepared one night, and by the time they got there the next morning, all 16 locations had been cleared out. And that means that obviously there was a leak. And that's the way the CIA protects its share of the drug trade. It has a vested interest, of course, in putting people out of the business who don't use money the way they want them to. I got involved with the Freeway Ricky Ross stories right after Gary Webb's great stories broke in the San Jose Mercury News in August of '96, Dark Alliance, because I had been talking about CIA and drugs and trying to blow the whistle on it, if you will, since 1979. That's a long time before '96. And Freeway Ricky Ross was a young, aggressive, savvy, streetwise marketer who started selling cocaine, and then suddenly some major sources opened up for him. Danilo Blandon, Norwin Meneses, both of whom were tied to the CIA and the Contras, and Gary Webb did a masterful job of breaking those stories and proving with documents that that was the case. So Freeway Ricky Ross had, if you will, an open line of endless supplies of cocaine, 6, 10, 100 kilos a week he was moving, which he cooked into crack cocaine. And he began buying up property along the Harbor Freeway. That's how they came to call him Freeway Rick. He was eventually busted, and he's serving a long time. He didn't know that the CIA was protecting him. The Gary Webb stories clearly show that people connected with his suppliers, an ex-cop from Orange County was meeting, among others, with a retired deputy director of operations of the CIA who was working down at the Fluor Corporation. His name was Bill Nelson in Orange County. And other figures in the case were actually directly tied by records from the FBI, Department of Justice, and elsewhere to intelligence operations. So basically what that amounted to was a situation that worked very much like what the Chinese did, or the British did, excuse me, in China so many years ago. We published a map on the website of my newsletter, From the Wilderness, and we, as Catherine Austin Fitz, a former Assistant Secretary of Housing, which showed that during the exact same period that Freeway Ricky Ross was at his heyday, home values in South Central Los Angeles were tanking. People owed $100,000 on their home. The place was a war zone, dead bodies in the backyard, prostitutes in the front, drive-by shooting. I mean, it was horrible. And people walked on their mortgages because they couldn't sell the houses. And tens of thousands of homes were moved literally for 10 and 20 cents on the dollar after people abandoned their mortgages. We call that ethnic cleansing, and it's the same model the British used. It's been done in Washington Heights in New York City, which was a CIA drug operation through the French Connection. So Freeway Ricky Ross was a big flash in the pan. He got enormously powerful, got lots of money for LAPD, for the battering rams and all the great SWAT teams and all that stuff in South Central, just right down there, just right down there. You can almost see it from there. I worked there many years ago. And then they took him out. But they took him out after he'd served his purpose, after he'd generated tens and perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, devastated an entire economic area, caused large portions of African Americans to move out of South Central Los Angeles, which weakened their political power, and that's the way the game is played. When I was on the street working narcotics in South Central in an area called the Jungle, which is still called the Jungle, they didn't have Crips and Bloods, they had Crips and Pyrus. This was back in the 70s. Cocaine really hadn't hit the streets yet. We had heroin, we had maybe a little powdered cocaine, but PCP, or SHRM as they call it, angel dust, was the big thing. The gangs evolved, and the gangs were a great business venture. They're basically marketing tools. That's really what they were. And they were quietly promoted behind the scenes. They got a lot of money. They got a lot of power. They fought for drug turf, and of course you had the Latin gangs as well. 18th Street, White Fence, you had them all. La M, the Mexican mafia that all came up. That were basically competing marketing organizations, if you will, almost like Kmart or Target. Except for Kmart and Target don't usually blow up each other's stores, but that's a major difference. Don't destroy the young life that's coming up because they have nothing else to do. But Freeway Rick sold to both of them. He didn't make any difference. He wasn't a part of one gang. He was the supplier. Although I would say that most of his turf was Crip turf, I'm not sure about that, but it didn't make any difference to him. He would deal with both. And when it came to supplies of cocaine, which was your lifeblood and your money in those days, he was respected by both sides. No, you had Crips and Bloods scattered in almost like a patchwork quilt all over the city. It wasn't like one portion of the city was all Crip and the other was all Blood. There were some areas where they were stronger, but if you went out to like the Venice ghetto, as they call it, which is a very small African-American enclave, out near the beach in Venice, you'd have a Crip and a Blood thing turn up there. Sometimes they turned up, if one turned up 20 blocks away, you'd have another one form up just to kind of balance them. But it was all quote-unquote gang turf, and it got way out of hand when they were shooting people over the color of their shoelaces, red or blue. But that to me was pretty much an artificial construct, which was just setting up marketing organizations wherein the young men of South Central were used, abused. Some made a lot of money. A lot of them died. A lot of them went to prison. A lot of them are still messed up to this day. Well, there was a period in the 1980s when every major city was trying to have an LA lookalike program. I mean, you saw the gangs metastasize, if you will, throughout the United States. Well, certainly there was no trouble in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, St. Louis, things like that. That happened. But even in small towns, it became a cultural phenomenon that people wanted to emulate it. I think that's pretty much gone now. The audacity of cocaine dealing on that level has pretty much gone back down below the covers. Although it's a real interesting note that U.S. peak cocaine consumption in about 1988 was 600 metric tons a year. Now that's a lot of cocaine compared to what it was in '79 when it was only 80 metric tons a year. But right now in 2004, guess what? It's still about 500 metric tons a year. Not quite as much crack, but an awful lot of blow is still going up people's noses. So you guys got something else to do while you're out here, or is this just for me?
Well, no, we're interviewing a lot of other people.
Good.
Yeah, we're actually going to be interviewing some ex-Bloods and some ex-Crips. We're going to be interviewing. We'll finally get into jail to do Tommy Chong, hopefully on Wednesday.
Freeway Ricky Ross's mom is a sweet lady, Annie Ross.
Let's talk about her. Okay, cool.
Annie Ross. I met her some of the first demonstrations right after the Gary Webb stories broke. And right after I confronted the CIA director, John Deutsch, at Locke High School, and that was probably the high moment of my life still to this day, making him look like a fool. And she's just this old, matronly, loving, wonderful black motherly type, and she suffered, but she's a symbol for so many tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of African-American mothers who watch their children get screwed up, both the boys and the girls, by the drug trade and what it brings, the way it's run. And we hit it off very well. She would always give me a great big hug, and every time I saw her, I had to go get a hug from her. It just made my day. It was November 15th, 1996. And I was going through a hard time then. My car had just been repossessed. I was getting a divorce. This was not one of the high points of my life. And I got a ride down there. And I had been to a couple of town hall meetings before and stood up and said what I knew about CIA and drugs through my connections at LAPD and through a former fiance who had been a career contract agent with the CIA. That's how they tried to get me involved, and I wouldn't do it. And it was a monumental historic event. I mean, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency was coming to Watts to face the people. I mean, it was actually one of the most monumental blunders of all time, if you think about it. So we got down to Locke High School, and there was security like I've never seen in my life. Guys with machine guns all over the roof. They knew I was coming. I got searched 80 ways from Sunday. I got a chair. It was near pandemonium. It was about, I guess, 1,200 people in a standing room only in the auditorium, 2,000 people outside listening on loudspeakers. And it was very hard to keep control. The meeting was chaired by Congresswoman Juanita Millender McDonald, and Julian Dixon, a black congressman who sat on the Intelligence Committee, was here. He died very suddenly of a heart attack under mysterious circumstances as the report was getting finalized, along with the Chief of Staff of the House Intelligence Committee, and White House counsel Cliff Ruff. They all died within a week of each other. And they were all involved in the CIA drug story. So I got called on finally, and I said to her very clearly, I was looking right at Deutsch, John Deutsch, the CIA director, and I said, I am a former LA police narcotics detective. I work South Central, and I can tell you, Director Deutsch, emphatically and without equivocation, the agency has dealt drugs in this country for a long time. And the room exploded. It just exploded. And I was able to name operations, Pegasus, Amadeus, Watchtower. I had redacted documents. I didn't carry them with me. I had too many to carry. But he stumbled and stammered and wrung his hands. You should go first to the Los Angeles Police Department. And of course my response was, I started there 18 years ago, sir, and they tried to kill me. Now what do you want me to do? You know, so that was a big moment, I think, for a lot of people. It was a symbolic victory showing that, yes, you can make the system squirt. Deutsch was there because of the Gary Webb stories. The Gary Webb stories had sparked a national furor. There was outrage everywhere. Congresswoman Maxine Waters had vowed, I wish she would have kept the vow, to make the issue her life's cause, her life's mission. And it was a great source of political concern for the Clinton administration. Of course, it was also August of 1996, just 2.5 months before the presidential election. So it was very good hay for the Democrats at the time, and the Democrats controlled one of the houses. So Deutsch felt he had to do something to try to deal with the outrage that was foaming all over the country at the time. And of course, it just blew up in his face. My good friend Catherine Austin Fitts has a saying, those who win in a rigged game get stupid. And these guys have always played in a rigged game, and that was one of the stupidest moves I have ever seen in my life. It certainly didn't do John Deutsch any good. He was guaranteed to become the next Secretary of Defense. He lost that, but it didn't hurt him much. He retired from CIA and joined the board of directors of Citigroup, which happens to launder an awful lot of the $600 billion a year in drug money. He has a partner now on the board of directors at Citigroup by the name of Roberto Hernandez, who was the owner of Banamex, the world's Mexico's largest bank, which is also the largest drug money laundering bank in Latin America. Well documented, it was known, and Citibank in 2001, May, paid $12 billion to buy the bank cash and put this major drug money launderer on the board of directors right next to John Deutsch, and they didn't even care who knew. I wasn't ready for what happened when I made my statement. I mean, the room broke out into cheers, kind of like a World Cup soccer match when Mexico scores a goal. I mean, it was a roar. But I was high on the adrenaline at the moment, and I was razor laser pinpoint dot focused on John Deutsch and nothing else. But there was a ton of commotion. And it took a long time to get the room back to order so that I could have even a short dialogue with John Deutsch and Congressman Dixon. And then my little segment ended, and I promised to make available all the information that I had. But that was something. I didn't realize when I stood up that it was going to play like that, and I certainly didn't expect the reaction. But that was truly a gratifying moment. I connected with them too, the people of South Central. Oh, you can see the reactions on their faces on my tape, The Truth and Lies of 9/11, where I play that clip that I took off of C-SPAN that aired on ABC Nightline. It aired on a lot of different networks. It was front page in the paper in Paris the next day, Paris Match. And you could see the reaction on their faces. It was that sense of relief. It was that sense of, oh my God, somebody else knows it's happening. Somebody else knows it's true. The crowd started chanting, "We told you, we told you, we told you." And it was a great moment of unity. And it was a healing moment for me, because I'd been out alone for 18 years and didn't really know that kind of support was there for me either. The average person in South Central Los Angeles did not know anything about really how the CIA worked. They had an intuitive sense. There's a great line in the movie Boys in the Hood. There's a great moment in the movie when Larry Fishburne is saying, "Hey man, we don't grow it. We don't own any airplanes. We don't have any laboratories. How does it get here? Why does it get here?" And that's a very good common sense approach that intuitively the people in South Central understood, that there was something much bigger than them that was moving the whole drug issue and the drug war. And that's a lot of the common sense that I used to deconstruct. Now, they didn't have knowledge about how the CIA is operated, or how, let's say, the CIA has someone in LAPD who's monitoring NIN, who knows to steer investigations away from certain targets, or the DEA allows certain boats to enter the harbors in New Orleans or Los Angeles or Houston or wherever they come in, New York, Miami. They don't understand the mechanics of it, which I learned and saw. Because, as an example, for a long time, the buzzword in South Central was pickup. For a long time in South Central, the buzzword was that the CIA was selling crack, and I'm very detail oriented. That's how I've maintained my credibility for all these years with my publication. I said, no, the CIA wasn't selling crack. The CIA was importing cocaine. Ricky Ross got it, turned it into crack, and he sold it. So, for some of the real specific mechanics they didn't get, and I've helped to educate a lot of people with that down there, and when they see it, especially when they started to see how the crack cocaine epidemic tied to the trashing of their real estate values, the ethnic cleansing where the honest, hard-working families didn't want to keep their kids in that environment. They walked away from their mortgage because they couldn't sell their houses, and they see it all as an organic process about how the money works. And I owe a great debt to Catherine Austin Fitz, my dear friend, former Assistant Secretary of Housing, and who was a managing director at Dillon Reed on Wall Street. When she and I got together, it was some of the most beautiful chemistry in terms of understanding how it all works that I've ever seen. And truly, that's why I always say, don't tell me anything, just show me how the money works. How does the money work? Show me the money. Well, like I say, there's $600 billion a year, roughly, in the liquid cash in the drug trade. That's larger than all but the 8 largest economies on the planet. It's too much money to hide under a pillow. You can't launder it through a bodega, although you see lots of convenience stores, lots of fast food restaurants in inner city neighborhoods that oftentimes do no business, and quite often they're run just as fronts to launder the money so that they can make big deposits in a bank account. According to banking regulations in the U.S., certain institutions are exempt from reporting currency transactions. If you and I make a deposit of $10,001, then the bank has to fill out what's called a currency transaction report because we might be laundering money. But many companies are exempt. And one category of company that's exempt is any company that has a stock ticker symbol on Wall Street, which means GE can move all the drug money it wants to. So can General Motors, so can Philip Morris. And as a matter of fact, they all have. In a lecture I gave at USC in December of 2000 called Wall Street's War for Drug Money, I showed some documents that originally appeared on PBS that showed that the Department of Justice called 6 or 7 companies in to meet with Janet Reno and Deputy Treasury Secretary Stu Eisenstadt, not because they were laundering drug money, but because they were laundering too much drug money. It was obvious. They were GM, Whirlpool, Sony, Packard Bell, Philip Morris, major Ford, major companies that were taking orders, let's say, from South America for 1,000 or 100 Chevy Suburbans and accepting just cash payment without asking where it came from. Or a drug dealer, if I'm a drug dealer in South America, I'm Pablo Ruppert, and I'm a drug lord in South America, and I've got all this drug cash. I have to make it legal. So I would open Pablo's Appliances, and I'd go to GE and I'd say, hey, sell me $200 million of your TVs, DVDs, VCRs, all that stuff, and I'm going to open an appliance store. And GE was saying, okay, we'll take the cash. Philip Morris was actually sued by the government of Colombia for smuggling Marlboro cigarettes into Colombia and selling drug cash back to New York. Now, when companies who trade on Wall Street have that drug cash, they can put it onto their net profits without recording it as a book sale. And as you increase net profits, that affects your price to earnings ratio. If you have a price to earnings ratio, it's very simple to understand. Don't let your eyes glaze over. Price to earnings is market cap. If you have a company with 10,000 shares of stock, each selling for $10, your market cap is $100,000. Total number of shares times the share price. You divide that by net profits. And the bottom line, literally on that, is that for every dollar you sneak onto the net profits, if your price to earnings is 60 to 1, you create $60 in stock value. Because analysts will then look at the stock and they'll say, oh, it's undervalued. It's very simple to understand. Let's say your price to earnings ratio is 30 to 1, as it was, well, Enron was 60 to 1. 30 is fairly customary. GE was 30 to about 30 to 1. Think of it as a fraction. You put a 30 over the 1. Now, if you make that 1 to a 2 in order to keep the relationship intact, the top number now becomes a 60 because it reduces down to 30 to 1. So if you sneak dollars onto the bottom line, that net profit, that 1 becomes a 2, you're adding $30 in stock value. All corporate executives get paid in stock. As a matter of fact, a very great side story from 1999 was that Richard Grasso, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, who got fired because of the hundreds of millions of dollars he was taking, flew down to Bogota, got an armor-plated limousine, and drove up and met with the head of the FARC guerrillas, the Comandante, and he pitched them and asked them to invest their drug profits in Wall Street. He didn't ask them to stop dealing drugs. He said, invest your cocaine money in the New York Stock Exchange. We'll make more money for you. And the FARC guerrillas said what I would have expected them to say is, no, we'd like to keep our money in Colombia for the benefit of the Colombian people. And hence we are now virtually at war with Colombia, which also has oil, and now in the post 9/11 world is definitely on the list for Dick Cheney's infinite war. But drug money is so much, it's a steroid, if you will. It's not all powerful, but it's like taking a baseball player who hits 385 and makes him hit 400, makes him the National League batting champ. Drug money also gets loaned very cheaply. Anybody who's financed a car understands that if you have an interest rate of 12% on a car, you're not going to get much of a car for $400 a month. But if you have an interest rate of 2%, you can get a great car for $400 a month. Well, when they do LBOs or leveraged buyouts on Wall Street, corporations have to borrow money. So they can borrow it from major banking houses like Morgan or Deutsche Bank, for example, at 10%, or they can borrow drug money at 6%. Well, that shaves their monthly payments by hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of a year. That money goes back on the net profits, which keeps their stock value up. That's why drug money is so important to Wall Street. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. God, according to some people in the spy business, is gold, oil, and drugs. We're certainly seeing the effects of oil now as the world's beginning to run out of hydrocarbon energy. Gold is a separate issue. The price of gold's been artificially suppressed. But drugs is also a key component of that, in that if you want to be godlike, if you want to have always the competitive edge, that allowed people like the Rothschild banking family to say, I don't care what politics you have or what government rules the country, let me control their banks and I'll determine their foreign policy. That's the way drug money works. When you think about 9/11, now I think the case I've been making since it happened, that this was a sequential war to control last remaining oil reserves on the planet, is becoming pretty clear. At From the Wilderness, we predicted events a year before they happened in some cases. Destabilization in Saudi Arabia, military moves to West Africa, increasing violence in Colombia, Venezuela, attempted coups in Venezuela. The coup in Haiti is tied to that. But there's an interesting little side story to Afghanistan, in that Afghanistan prior to 2001, or actually up to 1999, had been the largest producer of the opium poppy on the planet. The Taliban issued an edict in 2000, or 1999, banning opium poppy production, and it became in effect the single largest, most effective drug eradication program in human history. 94% of the opium poppies in Afghanistan were wiped out. Now that move alone, in my estimation, could have taken as much as $200 billion in liquid cash out of the world's banking system. You can't take 96% away of the opium, and Afghanistan at the time was producing 70% of the world's supply, out of the system, because there are many levels of sales. The farmer sells it to a guy, he smuggles it to Tashkent, to someplace else where it's refined into opium base or morphine base. Then it's smuggled again and then sold again, and each time the price goes up and up and up till it gets to the streets. And by the time it gets to the streets, it's been sold 4 or 5 times, generating enormous amounts of cash. And when I heard that, I said, that's an economic warfare against the U.S. And man, sure as shooting. I was saying throughout the summer of 2001 that Afghanistan's in deep trouble. Now, we invaded Afghanistan right after 9/11, secured the country in November. Just by coincidence, the planting season for the opium poppy is November, and you harvest in late May and early June. And we secured the country just in time to release a whole bunch of opium warlords for prison. It was in the news, lots of stories. CIA connected opium warlords that they broke out of jail, put them back in control, and Afghanistan planted a bumper crop right after the U.S. occupied the country. We are now in 2004. CNN just broke a story that opium production now in Afghanistan is 36 times higher, 18 times higher than it was under the Taliban. The harvest in the summer of 2004, it might even be 36 times, is going to be in excess of 4,000 metric tons. The world's back flooded again, and these cash flows are going back again through Western banks, even as the Western economy is very, very precarious. So there was no coincidence at all with that. People make a mistake of looking for just one reason why these guys do things. They have a multiplicity of reasons. Oh, well, we're going there, we can do this, you know, and these all came together conveniently for the invasion of Afghanistan. It was no shock to anybody that papers in India and Pakistan and throughout the region were reporting throughout the summer of 2001 that the U.S. had planned a military invasion of Afghanistan in October, and that was before 9/11. Richard Clark was lying when he said that nothing was being done. Plans had been begun in the Clinton administration to invade Afghanistan in October of 2001. It was just put off. No, that's exactly when it happened. Gee, what a surprise.
9/11, the new Michael Ruppert, let's get ready.
I don't.
I'm not asking your opinion.
The cocksucker sold out. I'm sorry. Well, we've seen in the 2 years of activism, I've been dubbed the godfather of the 9/11 research movement because from the wilderness, we broke all the major stories first that you see in a lot of books now. I'm just finishing my book. It should be out in the fall of 2004 or summer of 2004. And we've seen a lot of questions actually make it into the public consciousness. People now are asking questions about why fighters didn't scramble when they should have on 9/11, why fighters were successfully flying beside off-course airplanes when there were no emergencies 67 times in the year prior to June 1, 2001. Why there was massive insider trading on the financial markets. That's one of the stories I broke, that the CIA had full knowledge of the attacks, and somebody clearly did, because hundreds, perhaps hundreds, certainly billions and tens of billions of dollars in insider trades were placed on American, United, Swiss Reinsurance, AXA Reinsurance, on financial markets from Hong Kong to Tokyo, Chicago to New York to London to Berlin, just in the few days before the attacks. I've documented clearly that the Bush administration had received warnings from as many as 12 foreign governments prior to 9/11 that were so specific, and this is from the intelligence services. These are not just some crank callers. These were intelligence services who had penetrated Al-Qaeda, who had penetrated what was being created as a legend for 9/11 to blame it solely on Al-Qaeda, because I believe the U.S. government actually facilitated the attacks and held the door open. But the warnings that foreign governments sent to the White House and CIA headquarters, in some cases from the head of state like Vladimir Putin, were specific enough that the U.S. government knew that hijacked airliners were going to be crashed into the World Trade Center on the week of September the 9th. And when you looked at the insider trading, you knew it was going to be American and United Airlines. You also knew that at least one of the airports involved was going to be Boston. I mean, how much more specific does it have to get? And that's just, we know from open source material that nobody has challenged to this point. I have been working on something extremely huge, which just came to me in April and May of 2004, and I have established that on the day of September the 11th, NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were running as many as 4 exercises that involved, in one case or 2 cases, simulated hijacks in progress with fake radar blips being inserted into the screens of the Northeast Air Defense Command and aircraft being flown posing as hijacked airliners. That was deliberately with the intent of paralyzing fighter response. I know because my dad flew in interceptors in Maine during the Korean War, and neither he nor any other Air Force man I've ever known would have sat by if they had bogeys on the radar screen and knew the country was being attacked and wait for anybody to order them to go up and shoot them down. They would have responded. Something had to paralyze the system. One other war game had pulled most of America's fighter strength up to northern Alaska and Canada for a simulated exercise with Russian bombers, so that we had only 8 fighter jets working on 9/11, and they didn't know where to go. We have quotes now that some people thought there were as many as 11 off-course aircraft, some as many as 21 in one case. We have a quote, and the point is, if they didn't know where to send the fighters, they couldn't scramble them. And that's how the people in the U.S. government were enabled to make sure that some attacks succeeded and other attacks failed on 9/11. We didn't need the Patriot Act to have prevented 9/11, and yet the Patriot Act was already pretty much written before 9/11 even happened. It was on the books within weeks, and normally that process takes months to draft that kind of legislation. We don't need it, but now with the Patriot Act and unilateral decisions by John Ashcroft's Justice Department, we have lost portions of the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments to our Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech is affected because you can't tell anybody if the FBI has been into your office and taken records. The FBI can enter your house under sneak and peek provisions and not tell you that they've been there. The government lies about a lot of the provisions of that. They don't need warrants now to tap your, well, they never did for cell phones, but they don't need warrants to tap a lot of your electronic communications, which are not secure. John Ashcroft has decided to wiretap attorney-client conversations. There goes the 5th Amendment. There goes the 5th Amendment and the 6th Amendment. Somebody didn't like that. Cruel and unusual punishment. Well, obviously the torture now, the torture stories are coming to be second place, but this has been carried out. A story today I saw, maybe 10,000 people locked up in unnamed prisons all over the world without a lawyer or anything. And this is what's been turned loose on the American people since 9/11. That, and under the Homeland Security Act, which when you combine it with the Public Health Act, now gives the government the right to forcibly inoculate any American citizen with vaccines that have been untested for efficacy. And you may drop dead as a result of the vaccine, but the Homeland Security Bill immunizes, if you will, protects the vaccine makers from your family suing them if you drop dead. That's the kind of insanity we have entered into in the post-9/11 world, and it's going to do nothing but get worse. One of the great bright spots is that something like 60 major cities in the U.S. and 3 or 4 states and county governments have unilaterally rejected the Patriot Act. Now, there are some sunset clauses in there that to provide that some of these provisions go out of effect in January 2005, I think it is. And the Bush administration is going to have to try to renew those this year. Forget the presidential election. There's no difference in my book between John Kerry and idiot Bush. But probably the most important vote that Congress will make this year is if the people can force them to not renew the Patriot Act. The reason why we don't hear about the drug czar, and by the way, the drug czar is the son of General Vernon Walters, who was a great CIA hand during Iran-Contra, a great CIA player. John Walters is his name. We don't hear about it now because the drug business is doing, like John McNamara said so long ago, exactly what it's supposed to do. The drug money is flowing, people are going to jail, the money's going through Wall Street, people are happy, it's not out of control, and everybody's looking the other way. And that's exactly the way they need it to be, because they cannot sustain not only the U.S. economy, but they cannot sustain the U.S. empire, the American empire, without those drug flows. That's why nobody's hearing about it now. Yet heroin use is up all over the place. Heroin's on the street. I did a check with some guys I know. Cocaine is cheaper than it's ever been almost right now. Heroin's cheap, it's plentiful, it's high quality, the money's flowing, and nobody's squawking. That's the way they like it. Because everybody's attitude, and this ties back into peak oil in a way, is that before mankind discovered oil, planet Earth could support only 2 billion people. The planet eats 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy for every calorie of food that is consumed. All fertilizers are made out of natural gas. All pesticides are made out of oil. You have to irrigate a crop with electricity that's made by burning natural gas or oil or coal. You have to drive an oil-powered machine to plant it, harvest it. You take the oil away, the population will starve. And the attitude of the elites who do both the drug war, who did 9/11 and everything else is, well, you know, if people die as a result of drug use, all you're doing is weeding out the gene pool and letting the inferior ones kill themselves and saving us the trouble. And I've heard that attitude expressed more than once in my life, and it makes me sick. I have come more than 180 degrees. I worked narcotics in South Central Los Angeles. Now I am completely and totally in favor of decriminalizing all drug use, period. Drug addiction, like alcohol addiction, is not a criminal problem. It's a medical problem, a social problem, a spiritual problem. It is not a criminal problem. We have created this monstrous industry that not only has $200 billion a year for enforcement, but there's all the prisons, $30 billion a year on a prison industry that warehouses these people that trade their stocks. You have corporations like Wackenhut, they just changed their name, Corrections Corporation of America, that house prisoners, nonviolent drug offenders. As a matter of fact, I think 60% of the increase in prison population under Bill Clinton, which was like 1 million people, of the 60% of that new prison population are nonviolent drug offenders. And many of them are housed in private prisons, Wackenhut, CCA. They trade their stock on Wall Street based upon the number of people that are in jail. If that isn't sick, if that isn't the best definition of sickness in a society, in a culture, in a civilization, I can't tell you what is. And yet, that's the way everything seems to be working now. We live in a society and a culture and civilization which only sustains itself, if you want to call it that, by destroying other people's lives. That's what the ultimate sickness of all of this is. And we will never face that until we face how the money works, because we're all guilty. We all are part of an organism called human society on planet Earth in 2004. We have credit cards, we have 401k plans, we like low interest rates, we like consumer goods. We're all guilty of participating in this system, and that's why it's so intractable. I think if you wanted to start to do this, and that's why the DEA has fought it so hard, you would start by legalizing medical marijuana across the board. But you've seen how hard DEA has fought. They'll stop shipments of birdseed coming across the Canadian border that don't even have any THC content or can't get you high, can't grow any plants. And they will fight that tooth and nail, because that's how flimsy the facade of the drug war is. And one of the things that I've said, looking at 9/11, looking at everything else that's wrong in this screwed up world, one of the easiest ways to pull the plug is to decriminalize drug use. We would all have some prices to pay with that, but we have to pay that. I'm not sure everybody will get the connection between the two, but that's really an easy way to focus on the madness and stop it. The truth was that the drug trade was a protected commercial enterprise on behalf of Wall Street, policed, run, and managed by the Central Intelligence Agency. I got into this because I came from a family that was deeply rooted in intelligence. My mother had worked for the Army Security Agency. My dad left the Air Force, went to work for Martin Marietta on secret projects connected to the CIA. His relatives were CIA. I was earmarked from an early age, so to speak, and I graduated with honors from UCLA. And the agency, CIA, tried to recruit me the first time, and that was when I learned that the CIA routinely recruits people out of college or in police departments who have promising careers ahead of them to become CIA assets inside local police departments. I turned them down. I didn't want to do that. Joined LAPD, became very successful, specialized in narcotics in South Central. I met a very beautiful woman and fell in love with her, and she was a career contract agent for the Central Intelligence Agency. She tried to recruit me, and I was eager at first, not knowing what she was talking about. But then I began to see that her work involved protecting large quantities of drugs entering the U.S. and large quantities of firearms leaving the country. And that was a line I wouldn't cross. And I wouldn't cross that line when it cost me the love of that woman. And I ended that relationship, and it ultimately, to my surprise, cost me my career when I tried to do the right thing. The two things that I held most important in life both betrayed me. But I had seen a truth that was too big. It was too big to walk away from, too big to ignore. It was almost too big to humanly understand. And I didn't know what to do. But I started out 18 years ago, not 18, in 1979, which is now 25 years ago, my God, trying to teach people about what I had seen. Now a quarter of a century later, I guess maybe some people are starting to listen. Everything depends upon understanding how the money works. Until you understand Wall Street, the banking system, fractional reserve banking, until you understand how the major corporations, which form so much of the U.S. gross domestic product, are dependent upon the drug trade and how drug money feeds that like an ecosystem, like a drug, which keeps those people in power, which keeps tanks being sold and airplanes being sold and guns being sold and prisons being built, you'll never understand the drug war. And that's what a lot of people haven't wanted to understand, because they all have a little guilty part in all of it. God put the plant Papaver somniferum, which is the opium poppy, on planet Earth. He put the coca leaf on planet Earth. He put the marijuana plant, Cannabis sativa L, on planet Earth. Mankind took the opium plant and refined it with chemicals to make heroin. Mankind took the coca leaf and refined it with chemicals to make cocaine hydrochloride, because it's a built-in marketing technique. No point in blaming God for this. I agree with Albert Einstein, who said once you know there's a God, it doesn't make any difference whether you believe in one or not. I've had those experiences. I couldn't be together without my own concept of God. God's not to blame, man is.
Finally, what do we do to end this thing? What's a real answer besides just saying the CIA?
Jump off the balcony. Oh. Well, I've been saying for a long time, one thing that I would love to see happen, but I doubt if we can do it in this climate, is to decriminalize all drug use. Start absolutely with decriminalizing medical marijuana. Start absolutely with decriminalizing legitimate uses of the hemp plant. We're in a shortage of energy. The hemp plant helps produce oil. It produces cloth, paper. It's enormously useful, but you can grow it in your backyard. It's a way of being liberated from corporations. That's the big thing that all these guys don't want us to see, that we're imprisoned by corporations, a top-down economy, and a banking system which holds us in debt slavery. That's certainly a serious place to start. But we all have to start by looking in the mirror. How am I a part of this financial system? How do I contribute to it with my 401k plan or stock investments in a way where I realize that, gee, if we decriminalize drugs, that money goes away and my retirement plan might suffer. There are many ways that we're all guilty. We start by looking in the mirror, and we start with medical marijuana. I have had a long battle with many people in the drug reform network, because they have refused to look at the issue of Wall Street's role and the role of drug money in the economy. And my point is, until you look at that, you're not going to solve anything. But they don't want to take that problem. They want to do it nice and do medical marijuana. They fall into the same traps. One of my favorite sayings is, insanity is repeating the same action over and over again, expecting different results. And that's all these yo-yos have been doing for all this time, because they will not address the way drug money works in the economy. They will not address, until you do that, you can't solve the problem. I mean, how many millions of signatures have turned up on petitions for medical marijuana, and they pass a law in California, DEA refuses the law, the locals can't arrest, and DEA arrests people. I mean, it's nonsense. But that's the madness that has to be addressed first. One of my favorite sayings, and I've been on the political battlefield dealing with covert operations intelligence for a quarter of a century now. One of my favorite mantras is, don't shoot unless you get a headshot. Meaning that wasting your energy trying to wound a beast in a foot doesn't do anything but draw the beast's attention to you and turn his wrath against you, or his political power, or his checkbook against you. You have to go for the heart, the head. And the way drug money works is the head. I mean, dear old Donnie Rumsfeld, you know, our chief torturer, chief liar on 9/11, one of the chief liars, was the CEO of Searle Pharmaceuticals. Why would the pharmaceutical companies want you to be able to grow a plant in your backyard that might cure your menstrual cramps, might solve your headache, might give a terminally ill cancer patient, some chance at gaining some weight and having a tiny quality of life? If you can grow that in your backyard, there's no net profit for corporations, and we already know what net profit means to stock prices. Well, you have to look at how a lot of these drug reform groups have been compromised and by whose money. George Soros is no friend of mine. George Soros is a billionaire. George Soros funds a lot of these movements, but that way he controls what they talk about and what they don't.
Anything else you can think of? Yeah.
Go out and kick ass with this movie.
Just give me one more thing. Just give me one more thing. We're like, my name is Mike Ruppert. Something drug war. I can't think of anything. Just give me a good one. Give me one last one. You can go. My name is Mike Ruppert.
You don't want me to say publisher, editor from the wilderness?
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think under the circumstances, perhaps we should invade Poland tomorrow afternoon. And after that, we shall invade France.
Pull your sleeve down straight up your shoulder.
My name is Mike Ruppert. That's Los Angeles. 26 years ago, I was a narcotics investigator working on those streets in South Central. Then I caught CIA dealing drugs. Many of you know me. For years now, I've been publishing From the Wilderness, my newsletter. We're in 40 countries. I've been fighting the war on drugs, exposing the CIA's role in the drug trade and how $600 billion a year moves through Wall Street to keep your stock funds healthy. I've also been a critic on 9/11. There's a lot of stories that you need to learn, but there's some learning here tonight that you won't get on mainstream TV. You're not going to get it in a regular movie theater. This is the truth. Can you handle it? All right.
That was great.
Where's my adoring throngs of groupies?
Good job.
I get to call Sean up and tell him, hey, I did another one. We're happy to own one
Huh?
month, now the 9th state.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Amazing.
Pass through the legislature. Will do.
I'm out of here.
Man, have a good trip. Have a safe trip to Berlin. Good job, man. God, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, man.
Deutschland, Deutschland.
I can help you with the valet money or.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That-
how
that-
much is your
it said-
valet down
I don't
there?
know, it said $16 maximum,
Yeah.
so. Hey, I got a perk. I must be in style.
There you go.
You came out even.
all in one
I
place.
give the makeup one too.
Thank you very much.
Today you're a professional. You get your SAG card.
Now I go home, get in my underwear, and go back to writing the book.
That's awesome. I expect an autographed copy.
Well, you hunt me down. If you're holding a gun, I'll follow you.
All right.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Awesome. That
There you
was
go,
really good.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, that was great.